Automatic enrolment was the result of an unprecedented level of cooperation and partnership between the government, the industry, and employers. But as we heard from Liz Costa earlier today, people who've been automatically enrolled are unlikely to increase their saving levels on their own. We as an industry now need to build on the success of automatic enrolment and find ways of helping the people who are saving with us to create long-lasting, positive outcomes for their retirement savings. In a moment, Emma's going to talk about the research hitting the target that PLSA have done that looks at that very issue. It suggests that we set a series of retirement income targets that people can engage with, that will enable them to plan for their future, and then we'll have a debate about that. Targets seem like a very interesting idea. It's notoriously difficult to engage with people about saving for retirement. We've heard lots about that today already. But for those who do engage, a target really could provide something to aim at. Behavioural studies, again, as we've heard today, suggest that it's very hard for people to engage with ideas of their future self, to really think about what retirement's going to mean for them, called mental time travelling. Very difficult to get people to do it. Well, when you do get people to do it, though, it's a powerful motivator to act. And perhaps by getting people to set personal targets, we might get them to start thinking about their future self a bit more actively and thereby encourage them to act. At Nest, we believe in trying, testing, and learning. So we want to try the idea of targets, personal targets, and help our members to set targets. And we'll try and we'll see what works and what doesn't work, and we'll build on that. But perhaps we as an industry need to go even further than that. Perhaps as an industry, we need to start thinking about the whole person view. Perhaps we need to think about the overall financial position of the individual in the context of their retirement saving. We know that financial resilience for lots of people in this country is very low. We know that much of the population really struggle with financial issues, and we know that that impacts on their health and on their sense of well-being. Of the 10 million people who've been automatically enrolled over the last 6 years, we estimate that a quarter of them have no rainy day savings at all, and that a half of them will have less than £500 put away. As we start to focus on continuously increasing pension contributions, it's important to remember that, because lack of emergency liquidity can be one of the major reasons why people stop saving in a pension. Your washing machine breaks down, you've got no recourse other than to stop saving in the pension to pay for it, and then you never quite get started again. We wonder at Nest whether or not it is in the interests of our savers and of their retirement saving overall to encourage people to start putting some money aside for rainy day savings, an emergency fund. And that's why we're working with the Kennedy Business School at Harvard and with the Money Advice Service to trial a rainy day fund that will sit alongside the pension to see whether or not that really does create a feeling of financial wellness. We'll look to see whether it improves persistency. We'll look to see whether it increases account balances in pensions. We'll look at what people spend the money on and when. And we'll also look to see whether it reduces indebtedness and reduces a sense of financial stress. So now, to help us really think about how we can get people to start saving above the automatic enrolment minimum levels, I'd like to welcome Emma Douglas, Chair of the PLSA Policy Board, who's going to talk to us about hitting the target. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Helen. So I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to present some of the ideas from the PLSA Hitting the Target report. So the report was created by the PLSA and a small working group chaired by Richard Butcher. And we sought and received a great deal of industry feedback along the way. Now, I expect many of you in this hall will have contributed in some way to the report. So our aim at the PLSA is to help everyone achieve a better income in retirement. And the proposals in hitting the target cover many ideas as to how we can do that, from increasing auto-enrolment contributions, moving the minimums up, to scheme governance, to the need for guidance and advice. So I was part of the working group, and I'm really keen that the principles in the Hitting the Target document should form part of the remit for the new policy board's work. Now, clearly that's subject to the agreement of the board once we're formally in place after the AGM on Friday. But let's just go through what the key recommendations in the report were. So here they are on screen now. So this talk's going to focus on some of them, not all of them. So it's going to cover points on the retirement income targets, adequate contributions, engagement and at-retirement decisions. So just a couple of sentences on some of the others up there. So well-governed schemes, that talks to the need for high standards across the board. So that's whether schemes are regulated by TPR or FCA, and it also suggests some extension to the remit of IGCs. Accessible housing wealth, you can see that up there as well. That offers recommendations on how to make equity release products more flexible, more accessible, because certainly for the current generation of retirees, actually being able to unlock some of the housing wealth that they have may well be the secret to getting a decent standard of living in retirement. And then finally, making it easy to work in later life is going to be important, as working longer should be one of the options that people have got if they haven't got enough pension wealth or they haven't got enough property wealth. Now, and that isn't always as easy to achieve as it should be. So there's barriers there. You know, what if you're in poor health? What if you've got caring responsibilities? What if you just haven't got the right skill set to continue working? So here, we're thinking of midlife health checks, possibly some reskilling opportunities, the CIPD age diversity principles, and flexible working. All of these things we think can help here. So as this conference is about understanding savers' perspectives, the PLSA team have been out and about on the streets of London and Liverpool, and they've been asking some key questions. So we've got various vox pops to show you during this session. So the first one shows the answers that we got to questions about the lifestyle people were looking forward to in retirement and whether they knew how much they'd need to save.
When I retire, I like to go back to Jamaica and, you know, buy a house and settle there and enjoy the sunshine with my family.
I'd like to have enough to not worry about having a mortgage still hanging over my head or anything like that, but enough to relax and enjoy my retirement. I know my folks have had that, and I'd like to have that as well.
Be comfortable, but not have too much or too little, I'd say.
$1 million retirement.
Hopefully travelling and being able to do whatever I want, just chilling.
One which is comfortable where I don't have to think about money too much. So I would hope for £60,000 a year.
If you asked anyone that question, they'll all have the same answer. Everyone would want to be comfortable, wouldn't they?
I think this should be for pension plan, that should be nearly 10%.
I've got a pension, but I'm not going to lie, I literally don't know how it works or what's going to happen once I get to retire.
Whatever I can afford.
There is a figure, it's supposed to be a percentage of your income, isn't it? But I don't know really. I don't know how you work it out.
The poor, the middle class don't really understand what they need to put in to benefit themselves in the long run. You know, so and that's the problem. There's no strategy or there's nothing set in place so everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, because I'm only 17, I wouldn't have thought I would have to put that much in yet.
I guess probably put aside 20% a month or something like that, I guess.
Not really, although what I do know is that the cost in Jamaica is really high, but I don't know really the exact figure, how much that will be.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it, really? I don't think you do. And it's really hard. I know somebody said about percentages that you should be saving as you go up in life and all of that kind of stuff, but it's not that easy to think about, whereas I think if you think about it in real terms as to what your lifestyle to be when you retire, that would make sense.
So probably no really big surprises there. Certainly our research showed that only 23% of people feel that they know how much they need to save to get an adequate income in retirement. And we also know that as an industry, we're not really very good at giving simple answers to basic questions about, how much do I need to save? So sentences in answer to that often start with, it depends. And of course it does depend. But what we thought in hitting the target was it would be worth trying to define what it depends on. And so to a large extent, of course, what you need to save depends on what kind of lifestyle you actually want to live in retirement. So we really like the idea of targets. So 3 levels based on a basket of goods approach. Now, that's something that has actually worked well in the Australian market. Yep, there it is. So they actually call their 3 levels comfortable, modest, and state pension level. Theirs is called the age pension. And what they do, they just take some of the key items of expenditure in retirement and explain what you can look forward to in each category at each of those 3 different income levels. So they cover some of the more obvious categories, like what kind of holiday can you go on, what kind of car can you afford. But I do really like the fact that they pick out other important but less frequently discussed items. So they then explain them in words. But I think pictures do have a lot more impact. So let's have a quick look at a couple of categories, starting with alcohol, which is great that they have this as a category, I think. So at the comfortable level, they say that you can afford bottled wine. So I didn't know that the simple fact of wine being in a bottle actually made it a luxury item, but we do have to remember that these are Australian targets. And at the modest level, you can afford cask wine, which is a wine box, and, at the basic level, all you're going to get is homebrew. And then, rather fabulously, they also cover haircuts as well. Imagine having that in your basket of goods. So, at the comfortable level, you can have a really nice haircut in a luxury salon. The middle level, it's one of those pensioner special haircuts. And, of course, at the bottom level, there's no haircut at all, and I have a personal dread of turning into no haircut woman there, so that's my fear for retirement. But let's get back now to the Vox Pops and see what the people of London and Liverpool thought about the idea of targets.
Yes, the targets would be a very good idea because it will help a lot of people, the ordinary folks that just do ordinary jobs, even those that are on low paid. They'll give them a target to work for their future.
It gives it some context. So it says what we're working towards and how do we break down what that money equates to in that amount of years' time. So I think it'd be helpful to ground it slightly.
Yeah, I think a system of targets looks good. It's something to aim for as well, isn't it? And look forward to maybe. So yeah, it looks good.
I think it would, as long as you can afford it. I mean, obviously the cost of living's going up, and Britain's a difficult country to live in at the moment, and probably going to get far more difficult. If it's affordable, then yes, of course. But people must be given the option.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'd be good to have an idea of what you should be aiming for. Definitely. I think we all kind of bury our heads in the sand a bit in this country.
I think the targets would be good so you can see how comfortable you'd be in future.
I don't know if targets will help people save, because when you actually work out what you need for those targets, especially if you're working with the pension numbers, they're quite depressing, especially when you compare them to the wage situation. So I don't know if they would help necessarily.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose if you haven't got pension and you haven't really thought about it, if you show them on a graph, you could have this, this or this, might make them think.
Civil service pension, because I was previously in the civil service, so there's money there, and there'll be a Royal Mail pension and there'll be a state pension, but it probably in total won't be enough to survive on.
We're lucky we have a house and a rental flat, so we'll have that. Then several pensions from several different employers. So that's all in place. But maybe ideally I wouldn't want to work because I want to kind of relax and enjoy myself, but you never know.
Well, I'll have my pension, my own savings, state pension, I guess, and that's going to be it.
Well, hopefully I'll have both pension and property.
Well, I'd like to die working. I wouldn't really want to retire.
I don't anticipate getting a state pension, so I presume I'll just have to work up like young people don't. I don't think we're basically going to get a pension off the government, so you kind of just think, just have to hope for the best, which isn't probably the best strategy, but...
Inheritances from family members. That's the way to go. A nice big inheritance, and then I'm sorted.
So great to see there's a lot of realistic planning going on out there, particularly love the inheritances. So generally from that, the idea of targets was popular, but it is worth noting that at least one of the interviewees thought that it could be depressing if those targets were unattainable. And please do hold that thought. So Helen raised some of those points already in the introduction, and we are planning to debate the affordability point a bit later in the session. But the overall positive views on targets generally backs up the research that we've done. So 74% thought retirement planning would be easier if the UK had retirement income targets. 78% believe that the targets would help them to know whether they were on track for the lifestyle they would want in retirement. 70% actually said that targets would encourage them to save more, and that went up to 78% for millennials. So PLSA are progressing with creating the targets, working with Loughborough University to create that basket of goods. So we do plan to have the targets ready to go in the early part of next year. And we've already been talking to the industry, such as the providers of the calculators that are used widely by schemes and providers, because really the targets are only going to be a useful measure if as much of the industry as possible uses them. So they would need to be adopted by the single financial guidance body and built into the pensions dashboard when that comes. But overall, I am convinced that once we start talking to people about the kind of lifestyle they want, how much money they're going to need to achieve that, then we can probably have a better conversation about how much they need to save, even if some of that is inheritance from other family members. So moving on, one of the other key recommendations in hitting the target was gradually increasing auto-enrolment contributions to 12%. And ending up with a 50-50 split of contributions between employer and employee. Now, as Helen said, auto-enrolment has been a huge success. I mean, 10 million more people are saving something towards their retirement. But we do all know that many are not saving enough. And the role of the employer is really, really crucial in helping employees to achieve a better income in retirement. Clearly, the most important part is that they are the ones who are paying across contributions, but employers also give their employees information about the pension scheme, in many cases working closely with their pension providers. So let's see what the people of London and Liverpool thought about the role of the employer.
My employer should help us understand a bit more about pension. How it's broken down, or I don't know, how it's separated into what I pay in, because that's what I don't really understand.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. The only thing that I knew is that I got an email from Nest, and I didn't know what Nest was until I went in to open the email and realised that it's the national employment that the government has set up.
They're very hard to find out what you're going to get. It's quite confusing, nobody really understands it, and it just seems so far away that you just presume you'll keep working and working and they'll keep putting the age range up. So I don't know when we'll even retire at our age.
My employer could help me a little bit more understanding my pension, yeah. We did a little chat through, telling you what they're putting in and what you're putting in, how much, when you're eligible to claim for it, stuff like that. I'm a bit vague on.
I feel like if I spoke to my line manager, she might be able to help me more, but I still feel like she probably doesn't know enough to be able to guide me, I'd probably still have to go and look myself and read up on it.
And they brought in a financial advisor that ran a workshop on it, which is just really helpful because then it just starts to bring to life and illustrate it, because these are the kind of conversations that you don't often have. They're not very frequent, and actually unless someone takes the time out to explain it all and how it all comes together, it's very difficult to sit down with an Excel spreadsheet and say, right, well, what's the compounding effect of this interest? What are the different saving rates available? What's the difference between inflation and actually interest? And actually, am I losing money each year? So yeah, it's really, really helpful to have someone walk you through that.
I mean, we did get lots of documentation when we first joined, but I mean, it was a lot to get through, so I don't think I read everything that was provided, to be honest.
Believe that someone hasn't read every page of the pension brochure that they've been provided with. And then finally, for our Vox Pops, we tackle the question of advice. So how do people get the help they need during their working life and at retirement, and how can we as an industry provide it? So I use help as a generic term, but I remember the first time I did this, I was accused of introducing yet more complexity into an already complex area. So the accusation was along the lines of, don't talk about help when we're already struggling to determine whether our interactions with customers are information, guidance, or advice. Now, of course, we all know that very few consumers would appreciate the distinction between those three areas. But for any regulated entity concerned about conduct risk, these are the lines that we have to draw. So let's just dodge that issue for a minute by taking a look at our final Vox Pop.
Pensions people don't want to tell you what to do. They just say, and it's too complicated and we don't understand it.
There must be some more awareness, more education on this pension, and in a very precise and easy way, so that general public can understand these things, because they don't have time to go into the depth of long, big literatures or something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4 points.
If you haven't got a pension at all, I'd like it to be simple, the information. If you're in a position to get one, it's quite complicated, I remember, in the times even when I asked people. So if I were to start again, I'd like it to be pretty straightforward and explain well.
Something on paper, really, a letter that just is clear, that tells you exactly how much you've got, not how much it's worth in a few years from now, and percentages and charts that I don't understand anyway, because I haven't got a clue how much I've got in my pension. And I know at the moment, I'm like 55 this month, I can take some money out, but I don't understand all of that either, and what I have to pay tax on and what I'm left with. Can I have it all and just blow it on a cruise? I don't know.
Family mainly for me. It always has been.
His dad's quite financially savvy, so we ask him.
Dad and my granddad suggested it and all this, and because it was a bit of an early stage, I like to think we'll benefit as a result. But to turn around and ask a question now, I'm not sure actually.
I did speak to a financial advisor a couple of years ago, but I haven't spoken to anybody for a while, so probably need to do so again.
I mostly just read up about it myself. I'll search up on it, read some books. So yeah, crunch the numbers myself.
Friends normally, who are the same sort of age, see what they're up to and what they're doing.
So I look to the internet for advice and Google it.
Probably have to go online and read something, but I wouldn't know where to look.
So I just generally look online on the government websites for any ideas.
Ring DWP, that would probably be at a guess.
It's very hard because there's so many different organisations, you don't know which one suits you. So you can be jumping from left to right, and at the end of the day, a lot of people just can't be bothered to do it because no one's giving them the right advice to help them so they can move forward.
So I would like somebody maybe just to explain to me for about 10 minutes, and then that's it. That's all I'll need.
No one in particular. My dad, maybe.
If I'm honest, if I didn't have a pension at all, then I probably would, if I hadn't started. But because we already have started, I don't think I'd pay for advice. You kind of work on what you've already got, maybe.
Paying is a good idea, but it depends on how much it's going to cost. So if it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, you'll be I can't afford that, because people have bills, they have families to look after, so they have to watch their money. So if it's a reasonable, say maybe £25 to do something like that, knowing that at the end of it you will be able to benefit and get a pension, that would be great.
Probably not, no.
Independent advice, absolutely, it's worthwhile.
I think it would need to be kind of certainly reasonably priced, and I'd need to be sure that it was independent. I think what I'd be buying is the independence, really.
So I thought it was interesting that the gap between expectations and reality is pretty wide when it comes to the cost of independent financial advice. I mean, I know the guy in the video is taking a guess at £25, but it does show that £250, or more likely £500, is very much not what he was thinking of paying. So in hitting the target, we address the need for help by recommending a set of measures. So that includes midlife financial health check, getting the pensions dashboard up and running and including the targets on the dashboard, default referral to guidance from the new single financial guidance body when withdrawing money from a pension pot, allowing trustees and IGCs to signpost products that meet certain standards, and then finally, guided at retirement decisions. So we're really keen that new solutions should be developed that work for members post-retirement to give them both a sustainable income and flexibility. And my view is that this is likely to be achieved best through a mix of the existing products. And looking ahead, I think that for many members, the best retirement pathway will be one that combines drawdown, annuity and cash, rather than asking members to pick just one of those. So there's lots more in the Hitting the Target report, and you do have access to the full report on your conference app. But I'd just like to conclude with our vision as to the timeline for change. So making the ideas in the report come to life is a challenge. So it will require commitment from the government, because some of these things will need legislation, and also from us as an industry to adopt the proposals. And we're not suggesting that everything happens at once. So the timeline on this side is just a suggestion, but it shows that some of the proposals, especially targets, can come into force next year. Then value for money, later life diversity principles coming in over the next few years, AE scope widening, and then finally automatic increases in the amount paid in through auto-enrolment. That comes in stages until we get to the 12% rate, but not until 2030. So it'll take a while, but we do think that these recommendations do provide the groundwork for a new retirement settlement that will enable savers to feel secure that they will have adequate savings to meet the costs of later life. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. We're going to talk a little bit now about the question of lower earners, as Emma said, but get ready with your questions, because I'm going to be throwing out up to the audience very, very soon. But first of all, Emma, that was really fascinating, and it was very clear that there was a big thumbs up from the people in the Vox Pops and from your research for the idea of targets. But what about the lower earners? So 50% of the working population earn less than 22,000. In Nest, our average earner is about £18,500 per year. How can we realistically expect them to work towards a retirement income of 19,000?
And I think that's why we need 3 levels of targets, because it's not going to be realistic for everyone to achieve that comfortable retirement target. You know, that could be more than you were earning, as you rightly say. So there's 3 levels of target. We are planning, and this obviously needs to be confirmed, that actually the basic level will not be that much higher than the state pension. So the state pension will be there as a bedrock. You will need to add something on top of it for private savings. But I would hope that we wouldn't set this as a completely unattainable level for those who are on lower incomes, because the idea is that these should work across the board. So it's not just for the well-off, it's for everybody.
Is there a risk at all that for some people the targets will seem so unattainable? I think somebody on the Vox Pop was suggesting it might be the case, so unattainable that they might think, oh, well, I'll just give up and not try at all?
I think that is a risk. But I suppose I would rather take that risk and inform people so that they have got a slightly better idea of what they're actually going to get in retirement. So, this isn't really changing what they're going to get. It's just setting some standards out in terms of, this is the reality. And I always feel that information, although it can be quite depressing at the time, it's better that you know it earlier on than it's just such a horrible surprise at retirement when there's then literally nothing you can do about it.
And how about people who are perhaps struggling with debt, lower earners struggling with debt? How are we going to explain to them that perhaps they might need to think about paying down their debts before they start saving a little bit more?
Yeah, I do think that's a good one. That's something that actually we debated extensively in the Hitting the Target group. So we were talking about, do you allow people to access their pension wealth early? I mean, I think lessons from the US show that didn't actually turn out very well, that people then deplete their savings pots. Or what about, we're planning that we get up to a 12% rate. Well, what if we allow people to opt down so that you're still in, you still have to stay at 8%, but you don't have to go all the way up to 12. That would be optional. Or, of course, there's all the thinking that you've done at Nest around the sidecar. Yeah. So you've got some savings there on the side that are accessible and they can be moved over to the pension at times. So I think there's plenty of ideas that we should explore there. We were less keen, to be honest, on the idea of being able to take money out for hardship loans from your pension, which is more of the US model.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, questions from the audience. Have we got any questions from the audience? While we're waiting for that, we've got some on the apps. So while we're waiting for a couple of questions to appear. Here's a good one. What's stopping the implementation of the pensions dashboard?
Well, maybe that's something we could ask the minister tomorrow when he's in talking to us. So I think at the moment we're waiting for that feasibility study that's been promised for quite a long time. But actually, I think that as an industry, we probably do have an opportunity to get behind the pensions dashboard. The tech is broadly there to do it. There was certainly a lot of good work done by the ABI when they had a consortium together to look at this. Then it's been given to the DWP and we've been waiting for this feasibility study. So I think we've had a little bit of stalling. The feasibility study I think is due out soon, but let's ask the minister tomorrow. Good question for the minister, I think. But then I do feel, everything that we've seen in the press is it will be back on us as an industry to make these things happen. And, we'll all have to play our part in that.
And there's a very direct question in here for you, Emma. Will L&G put the targets on their benefit statements?
Very much so, yes. Yes, I think I will be boiled in oil if I don't put them on our benefit statements. So it's simple, really.
Fantastic.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, question over there.
Hello, I'm Paul Rhodes from the REACH PLC pension scheme. With those AE targets going up, what would be the employer-employee split? And how do you think that would impact on wages, which could have a negative effect on especially lower earners?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do want to get to a 50% split between employer and employee. So when you look around the world, obviously the Australian system, the employer pays all of it. And even in some European countries, you'll find the employer will pay the majority of it. So clearly, there's no free lunch here. Whoever's paying for it, it's going to be painful on one side or the other. We felt that the 50-50 split was probably more achievable because just asking members to keep paying more money in, they will probably at some point just hit the point when they're just going to opt out. Whereas if they can see that their employer is matching them along the way, there'll be more incentive to stay in. Clearly, there is a cost to the employer for that. That will have an impact on wages. That's what basically the equation. It's not like we can magic up spare money. If you're not paying it in pay now, but you're paying it in deferred pay, the bill still has to add up to the same thing. So we don't think it's like a silver bullet that employers can suddenly find the money. And also, that's why we're trying to phase it in over a reasonably long period. So employers actually have the chance to budget for that increase and potentially adjust the pay levels accordingly.
Thank you.
Have you had any reaction from employers or employer groups to the ideas?
Nothing substantial. I mean, clearly, no one wants to pay more money in, whether you're the members or whether you're employers. But equally, I think everyone agrees that it needs to happen for most people to get to a decent standard of living in retirement. But like I said, it's not that we can magic up the money. It's going to be a compromise one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And arguably, I guess, there is something in it for employers too.
There is, and I think that, one of the things that, employers are seeing and are starting to see more is that, it's important to them, just for workforce management, to be able to know that people can afford to retire from their organisations. What you don't want is a lot of people at the top of your organisation who just can't afford to retire, and then the younger generation coming through, they can't move up through the ranks. It's not going to be a good situation for employers, obviously, or society as a whole, if people don't have enough money to be able to stop working and move into retirement.
Absolutely. I think we have another question over there.
Richard Butcher. So it's not a question, actually, Emma. I'm just going to add to that. We did do some survey work to find out what impact this would have on employers. And generally speaking, I think the numbers, I can't recall them exactly what they were, but around 80% of employers are supportive of AE, and a good 50% of them were willing for contributions to increase and for them to pay for that increase in contributions. They can see the benefit of employees having an adequate income in retirement.
Great. Okay. Have we got another question in the audience? Yes.
Grenville Johnson, Carmack Pension Fund, and a retired chartered accountant enjoying his pension. My real concern at the end of all this, particularly for your nest people, who you say are around 18,500, 22,500 or whatever, is that part of the reason for saving is to know what you're going to end up with when you retire and how you're going to find yourself placed vis-a-vis the benefit system. Because if I decide to save and end up with a pension per week of, let's say, £100, and if my next door neighbour next to me decides not to save and do nothing and opt out, and he ends up getting a benefit when he achieves 65, and I've discovered that he gets that automatically. Meanwhile, I've saved and get mine, but I don't get the benefits. The government has actually got to make it quite clear that people who are saving to do this, it's worth their while. It's going to benefit them at the end of the day. I despair when I see talk in the press that they're thinking of taxing benefits, pensions in the next few weeks in the budget. We want people to save to retire, and really the more they do, the better. And it should be without limit. I also despair at the age of 73 and a half that the tax regime on inheritance tax and pension funds changes the minute you get to 75, and it worsens. And I think, if the government really want this nation to save for their retirement, they've actually got to do better to sell it.
So Emma, is government policy really behind this, and can we rely on government policy not to erode savings benefits? Maybe another one for the Minister tomorrow, I think.
I think it would be, because those are all good points. And the last thing we want to do is encourage people to save when they really shouldn't have done, and they should have enjoyed that money and had a better lifestyle when they were working. So, I think there's plenty to think about there. And as I said, some of this is going to need changes in legislation. So some of it, is in our gift, but some of it will need changes in legislation. And we need the policy to go with the thrust of the Hitting the Targets report. So yeah, I think one for the Minister tomorrow as well. Yeah,
plenty
good.
of questions for the Minister tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm chairing that, so I'll just be noting these questions down already.
Okay, and I think we have another question over there.
Yeah, my question sort of follows on from the last point. Is something we all agreed on is that people need to be educated, they need to understand, and need to save and so on. But something I've not been hearing is some kind of nationwide, government-led, industry-led advertising campaign. Advertising is mightily powerful. You know, if you had the large soft drinks companies and sweet manufacturers, they're global brands. You see them advertised everywhere in the world, every minute of every day almost. But we don't get that in pension saving. We don't get that as in education. There's a lot of money in this industry, and there's a lot of investment from government, but I'm not hearing any impetus saying that there needs to be, like, I remember back in the 1970s, the Milk Marketing Board doing advertising on the TV. Where's the Pension Marketing Board led by government and industry?
And I think that actually that's such a good point in connection with targets, because if we've got some nice clear messages to get out there in advertising, there's more rationale to do it. I think sometimes, the messages that we have to give have been a little bit blurry, save more. It's not terribly clear. Whereas I think behind the targets, I mean, really, what we were thinking of when we came up with the targets was a bit of the kind of 5-a-day campaign. It's just something that people can gradually get to understand. And that 5-a-day campaign obviously has had some impact in terms of people's behaviour. So I think that there's some really good ideas there in terms of, we can't just have the targets and they get locked away in a dark room. We have to talk about them, we have to make them mainstream. People have to actually start discussing them in terms of, what kind of retirement are you going to have? But I think there is something to get behind.
There's another one for the Minister here, I think, in the app. Are your timelines realistic? Have you really factored in political paralysis due to Brexit?
And I think that's why we've pushed out quite a lot of the things that are definitely going to require legislation into a bit further out, because, yes, it's not realistic to say that anything is going to top the agenda of Brexit right now. So, those AE increases, they are quite a bit further out. So they start in 2025, go on to 2030. And it's a suggested timeline, but we felt it was important to actually put some dates on it to give ourselves some challenge, because otherwise, again, it's great to think of these ideas, but it's getting them to work in reality that is always going to be the bigger challenge.
Great, thank you, Emma. There's some fantastic questions, and there's a lot of questions in the app here for you, so I'm having to kind of pick some out. But there's one here on the gig economy, which is the real kind of topic of the moment. So how do we address income variability, especially people working in the gig economy or people on 0 hours contracts, when it comes to setting a percentage of income expectations?
Yeah, I do think that's a really tough one. So, we looked at sort of gig economy, self-employed, what do we do with that kind of population when there isn't the employer there isn't the employer contribution to incentivise them. So I think that one, is still very much work in progress. Got to think about how that works. I still think targets can work, though, because you can still look at, what of these lifestyles do I aspire to, and look at what you've saved, and is that going to be enough to get you there? So it doesn't address the whole issue of how do we actually get the self-employed, and particularly gig economy, 0 hours contracts, very variable pay, how do we get them into the system? But I think it still is useful for everybody to measure, well, what am I going to get then? What kind of standard of living could I then buy in retirement from what I've saved?
Fantastic. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, I think we've got time for one last question, so we'll give it to the gentleman at the back.
Thanks. Clifford Sims from Squire Patton Boggs. Emma, I don't think you mentioned investment volatility in your research. I know you probably didn't have time to cover everything, but was that something that the people you interviewed were remotely bothered about, or were they talking specifically from a savings cash-based perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Clifford. I think most of them were, it's all about the saving. So, quite interesting, do people think of pensions as saving or investment? from what we heard, they seem to be very much in the savings mindset, far less about, is my money invested? What's it invested in? Though I do think that potentially what your money is invested in is a hidden kind of communication superpower that we haven't fully tapped into yet. So that was, part of some of the Dragon's Den ideas earlier. If we can align people with their money is actually being invested according to their principles, that they might feel a little bit more attached to their pension and have a bit more understanding of where it's invested, because it's actually quite interesting and they want to know about it, as opposed to just one more fact sheet about a multi-asset fund. I love them, but I don't think most people in the audience, or certainly in the general public, are going to be quite as attached to that. Whereas some messages about your money is being invested in these ways, and you can relate to that or align to that with your principles, I think there's definitely something there.
I think that's a really powerful note to finish on. Let's align people with the way their money's invested and really get people engaged with what their retirement saving is doing for the world as well as for them. That's a fantastic place to finish. I'd like to thank you all for being such an engaged audience, and I'd like to really thank the PLSA for sponsoring research into such an important area. So important that we do build on the success of auto-enrollment. But most of all, I'd like to thank you, Emma, for a fascinating presentation and a really great Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.